What's up, Earth Rockers? It's your boy Shovatar here to talk about more NES Castlevania. This time we're talking about Castlevania 1. I decided to revisit Simon's first quest before talking about Simon's second quest, which is known as Simon's Quest. Something about Castlevania 1. I love Castlevania 1. It doesn't feel like any other game in the series to me because it's so short and it's so streamlined. It's strange to call the first game in the series streamlined, of course, because there's nothing really to streamline. It's just how it is. But it's very manageably sized. But something about Castlevania 1 that always bothered me peripherally is the fact that two of the most climactic and what are supposed to be difficult boss fights in the game are completely cheesable with the Holy Water. Those two fights being, of course, the Grim Reaper and then Dracula Phase 2. And for a long time, I had thought about, you could classify it as sort of like almost like an exploit. In my original commentary for my Castlevania 1 Deathless runs, I said that for the Grim Reaper specifically, I didn't really consider it an exploit. Like, I didn't consider it like cheating, and I still don't. But I thought that if I was going to play NES Castlevania games again, I thought it might be fun to go back and see what those fights are like without the Holy Water. Like, what those fights are like when you actually engage with the boss and engage with its mechanics, instead of just demolishing it. So that's the purpose of this run. No Holy Water means that a couple of levels are going to be different. A couple of stages, I should say. Not really so much in the early game, because the Holy Water doesn't... What's happening here, by the way, is I'm waiting for the bat to show up so I can stopwatch and then kill it with the whip. I don't really know why I decided to do it like this, because this isn't really functionally that different from just picking up the axe and killing with the axe. I don't know. I guess I just wanted to see if that would be faster or easier or something. Anyway, yeah, early game is not going to be too different. The changes are mostly going to be in the back half of the game because for level 2 because for level 1 there's no holy water available at all as far as I know. I think it may be a random drop, and then in level 2 you want the cross because you're dealing with Medusa heads. And the holy water is not great from Medusa heads. There is a holy water available in level 2, which you can use to stun lock and kill the Medusa head boss at the end. But that's really not necessary. It's not a boss that requires a stun lock in order to consistently defeat. You just kind of have to keep hitting it until it dies. So I'm not even going to bother dropping the cross for the stopwatch, which is I think what I used in my other runs to kill it. I think I used the stopwatch to stun lock it. The reason is just for the sake of simplicity, because I'm basically going to be holding onto a triple shot cross for the rest of the entire run. I don't think I ever drop it after this point. Which is a departure from not just level 5 and level 6, how I played it before, but also level 4, and that's really where some of the problems came in, but I'll talk about that later. For now, I just want to say that going back to Castlevania 1 after playing the later games, it's interesting how simple it feels. Especially contrasting it with Chronicles, with the original mode specifically. It's so much more... like I said, streamlined and simple, and that opens up some interesting possibilities. I've said before that I would never do a no-damage run, but if I was going to do a no-damage run of any game, this is the obvious contender just because it's shorter than all the other ones. Like, the fact that it's shorter gives it this, makes it feel more casual and more like just a fun little game you can pop in and play whenever you want. It doesn't feel like it's kind of like an ordeal. It doesn't feel like an ordeal to me at this point because my level of familiarity with it, but it doesn't feel as much like it doesn't feel as much like a journey. It doesn't feel like a journey as much as later games. Which is not to say that that's necessarily a bad thing. I mean, it's supposed to be a gauntlet of challenges on your way to defeat Dracula, but I'm basically just talking about how like the game feels, because I've had a hard time. I've talked before about a tier list that I'm working on that I sort of like am filling in as I go through the series, and I have kind of a hard time with Castlevania 1 because being the first game in the series, it's hard to compare it to things that built on it later. I think the thing about Castlevania 1 is that the way that I'm organizing my tier list, I have to decide whether or not a game, any particular game that I evaluate has a major flaw in it. And when I say a major flaw, that can be something as endemic as the Dracula X movement speed, or something as specific as the 8-2 platforms in Castlevania 4. I would classify that as a major problem, something that actively impedes your ability to play the game. Castlevania 1 doesn't really have anything like that, except maybe the bats in stage... what stage would that be? Stage 16, at the very end of the game. I feel like those things are really not designed very well, and I'm going to have to talk more about that when we get there. Unfortunately, one of the problems is that... Oh, actually, this is something I can talk about. So usually I do pick up the Holy Water at the start of level 3, specifically for this Bone Thrower who's going to show up in a second year, but I found another way to kill him, which is to just let him kill himself. Because normally trying to get past that guy, like going down the stairs, it's really hard to not get hit by him, and it's hard to safely approach him unless you either like stopwatch or you throw a holy water or an axe down there. But that's a way to get rid of him without ever coming into any, without ever experiencing any serious risk of taking any damage. And here I play like an idiot and get hit by the Medusa head. But the cross, I've heard some people say in the past that the cross is overpowered in Castlevania 1. And it's hard for me to... I mean, the Holy Water is obviously overpowered because it lets you insta-kill, not insta-kill, but lets you stunlock, lets you kill bosses in a way that is very clearly not, or at least doesn't seem to be intentional. And that's just extremely effective, and you're basically bypassing all their mechanics. So the Holy Water being overpowered makes sense to me. The Cross being overpowered, I think when people say that, what they mean is that the Cross is more overpowered in standard Castlevania 1 situations. Like dealing with enemies, having these projectiles that basically cover this certain area of the screen with damage and that sustain themselves, that stay there for a long time, is pretty important and is really good. So if you're not using the Holy Water, that means you're using the Cross, pretty much. As should be apparent from the footage seen here. And I think I actually had a hard time relearning the Mummy boss here because there's nothing to learn. You just kind of have to keep hitting them until they die. And my plan here was just to, yeah, get into a corner and just spam this shit until they die. Still hits me a couple times, unfortunately. Yeah, I don't know, man. I still don't really know, like, what the deal is with those guys and, like, with what you're supposed to do about them. I guess that's... See, the thing is, that's bad. That's like a thing about Castlevania 1 that makes it not great, but I wouldn't necessarily classify it as a major problem. And even parts like this, like Stage 9, or Stage 10, rather, is... It's the kind of thing that I gave a lot of shit to Dracula X for. Because Dracula X has a couple of sections where the game loves to put ambush enemies in front of you that if you didn't know they were there would catch you completely off guard and would just kill you. And Stage 10 kind of has a lot of that, where the fish people are jumping on this set cycle, and you have to just know to go super fast at the start to avoid getting hit by them. And I think that the difference between Castlevania 1 and Dracula X in this regard is... It's two things. For one, the thing about Dracula X is that Dracula X, the ambush enemies punish you specifically for jumping, because you have such a slow movement speed, and because you have such a slow movement speed, you like always want to be doing that. You always want to like be jumping and whipping to get forward as much as possible, and then it punishes you for that. Castlevania 1 gives you a normal movement speed, and also Stage 10 is kind of like the only part like that in the whole game. Dracula X does it all the time, and that dragon exploded because apparently its other sections besides its head do take damage. I didn't actually know that for a very long time, but I learned that as I was doing this run. That's what's happening there. It's the head takes damage, but also the segments take damage too. Normally it's not that much damage, but if you have a cross that's like constantly going back and forth, hitting every single segment, every single fucking second that it's on the screen, then that's significant. And now here's the Igor Frankenstein fight, and this is actually a really big problem, because this is another fight that I got accustomed to cheesing with the holy water. And there I basically just out DPS raced. I basically just out damaged him. I didn't really play that boss fight correctly. I think what I probably should have done, because what I did in my hard mode run when I didn't use the holy water is I sat in the bottom left corner with the daggers and I just spammed the daggers. That doesn't really work here because the cross or it might work, but the cross has a limited range. Daggers just keep going until they leave the screen, but the cross sort of stalls and comes back. Usually that's a good thing, because that means that it's covering a certain area of the screen for longer, and it's continuously doing damage to whatever happens to be wherever it is. If I could trust Frankenstein to walk forward into my cross, then that would be good. But if not, then the cross would be not as good as the daggers there. And I did contemplate swapping out the cross for the daggers, and maybe I should have, because there is a dagger at the very start of stage 12 that I could have just grabbed, and there's a cross at the very end of stage 15, which I could have grabbed before the death fight, because you definitely want a cross, and you want triple shot cross for the Grim Reaper fight. If you're not going to Holy Water Stonelock him, you absolutely 100% want the cross. So I think I could probably incorporate a more consistent Frankenstein kill into this route if I wanted to, but there it just kind of worked out, where I got in with full health, and I kind of fucked myself there because I was hitting the Igor with crosses as the Igor was inside of me, which is just ensuring that the moment that its damage and vulnerability wore off, it would just fucking hit me again. So a slight repositioning there, if I just walked back a little bit and then kept spamming crosses, could have kept the Igor completely contained, which is what I wanted, and also prevented me from taking any damage. So that was just a really badly played fight, but fortunately I had enough health that it didn't matter. And this is actually tough too, because I had gotten used to killing this guy just by kind of lobbing a holy water up onto that higher platform from the lower one. And now that I can't do that, I have to do this awkward interaction with him where I have to whip at him when he's off the screen and I can't see him. Because even though he's off the screen, for some reason the one on the bottom, if it leaves the screen, it'll just stay despawned, but that one up there, for some fucking reason, doesn't despawn in the same way. It'll just sit there and like start throwing axes at you from off screen, and you have to just fucking guess where they're coming from. And you can't really... I mean, I could have maybe just gone up the stairs, but if he had thrown high and I was mid-staircase climb, it would have just hit me. So it felt like the safer option was just to kill it, even though that meant staying in the line of its axis for longer. And ultimately it did work out. I mean, I didn't take any damage there, although I feel like I very easily could have. It's interesting the things that depriving yourself of the holy water makes you do that I wasn't expecting to have to do. Like, I knew the two big things I was thinking about once I decided to do a no holy water run were obviously the Grim Reaper and then Dracula Phase 2. I wasn't really thinking about the small combat interactions in the pre-boss, in the rest of the level outside of the context of boss fights, but lots of things ended up being relevant, like the Axe Knight there, and then the skeleton in level 3, of course. And now the big problem, which I had also partially anticipated, is getting through the Grim Reaper hallway, because I'd learned the Grim Reaper hallway with the holy water. And the solution is to basically just spam crosses at the knights until they die, because the crosses don't go through the knights, but the knights do still take damage from it. So once you're in a spot where your line of crosses is guaranteed to hit whatever Medusa head is coming towards you, you can just stand there and spam it and just wait for him to die and then just keep going and go about your life. So once I figured that out, it was very, very easy. And it's actually almost easier to do that than it is to utilize the holy water. But here's the Grim Reaper fight with the cross, and as you can see, the reason why the cross is so good is that I can pretty much destroy his projectiles without having to think about it. Where the cross just has this path through the air that just destroys whatever's there, I don't have to worry about it, and you'll notice there that I took damage after the Grim Reaper died, and his scythes are still on the screen. His scythes do not despawn when he does. So you have to keep worrying about them even after the Grim Reaper dies. And like you can get knocked down to 1 health, kill the Grim Reaper, and then get killed by a scythe before you get to the orb in the center. Like that's happened to me before. So you really can never relax there. Um, but that also shows the power of the cross, because that was almost a no damage Grim Reaper fight. It actually was a no damage Grim Reaper fight prior to his death, and here the fucking bat hits me anyway, because my timing is slightly off in terms of when I got to that platform, and I barely survived by getting knocked into the other platform. This is the one part of Castlevania 1 that I think is really bad, because this doesn't make any sense. The actions that I'm undertaking to get through this particular area consistently feel completely arbitrary. Like, there's no reason in my mind why jumping over the 5th bat should stop it from killing me. Or, I'm sorry, the 4th bat. It actually feels exploitative in a way that even the Holy Water Stunlock doesn't. Because the Holy Water Stunlock at least is thematically fitting, like you utilize a holy artifact to destroy the Grim Reaper. There I stopwatched when I didn't mean to, which means I now have 1 fewer stopwatch to get through this part with the Igors and the Eagles, which is not really what I want. But I think it should be just enough for me to get out of here unscathed. Yep, I barely make it. So that was good. That was very decisive. I like that I didn't wait until the Igors were already scampering around to the platforms. I like how quickly I stopwatched there. Just before they even get there, before they can even take up any space, but after they spawn, so the new ones don't spawn in places that I'm not anticipating them being. So that was actually really, really, really good. Yeah, I think I stopped. I think I was in the middle talking about the Grim Reaper hallway when the death fight started. It's almost easier to do with the cross. You don't have to worry about like jumping forward and maintaining like forward momentum and dropping the holy water on top of the knights. Although I think both the cross and the holy water are perfectly fine for the Grim Reaper hallway and are fine for the Grim Reaper himself. Although of course the holy water is much easier. And what's funny is that fighting the Grim Reaper in Chronicles actually kind of prepared me for that, because the first thing I did in that Grim Reaper fight that happened just now is I jumped up and I just started throwing crosses at him while he spawned in on the platform to do as much early damage to him as I possibly could. And it just so happened that his scythe spawned in such a way that when the cross was on its return journey, it hit them and cleared them out. So that was a really, really good Grim Reaper fight. Worked out great. I was worried about whether or not I was going to be able to just kind of come back to this game and just pick it right back up again, but I think partially because it's so short, and partially because I had already played some Densetsu and I was back in the NES, mindset, it worked out really well. And I could be using the cross here to do more damage to Dracula for each of his phases, but this is another just personal thing where I've learned this fight with the whip. Like, I learned this fight with the holy water, I learned this fight with the whip. This is how I know this fight, and I'm just not gonna fuck with it, because the fact that I have to actually fight Dracula Phase 2 instead of just stunlocking him means that Phase 1 is now much more important. It's just like Chronicles, where I can no longer say reliably that I'm going to get through Phase 2 of Dracula without taking damage. Every point of health is super important, so I just don't want to fuck with it, and I don't want to take any risks. I just want to play it the way that I know it and finish it up. And playing these old NES games again right after Chronicles is actually a really good decision, because I think I said in one of my Chronicles commentary videos that I should have played Chronicles right after these NES games because they play so similarly. This is just exactly the same thing, except in reverse. So, that's good. The head goes flying off, and now comes Phase 2. And Phase 2 is difficult because it's unpredictable. I don't exactly remember if there's any pattern to when he decides to shoot the fireballs. I don't know if it's 3 jumps and fireballs, but the point is that... No, it's not. Okay, so the point is that... So the reason I'm jumping and throwing the cross is because, number 1, that's just where his hitbox is, where you can damage him, and number 2, so that the cross can intercept the fireballs. And that's how I got through that whole fight without taking any damage, is because it just so happened that when I jumped in through when he started to wind up his fireball attack, it just so happened that the cross was passing through his mouth as he spawned the fireballs. So, I don't know, there's probably a specific timing that I could learn to do that every time, like as soon as I notice him telegraphing, because there's a slight telegraph to the fireball attack. He does like a weird thing with his mouth. So it could be that as soon as I notice him doing that, there's like a timing I could try to hit, but I wasn't doing that intentionally. That was just sort of like, if it works out, it works out kind of thing, and that's why it was so important for me to get there with full health, because I didn't have a specific plan that involved taking no damage. My plan was to take some damage. It just so happened that that time I got a good timing that meant that I didn't take damage. So that's what happened there. And this was actually really fun. It was really fun to kind of come back to the game and play it in a different way again. Usually I don't like arbitrary challenges, but the Holy Water stun locks in Castlevania 1 are so notorious, and they do feel so outside of the realm of how the rest of the game plays that I felt like it was worth taking another shot at it. I'm not going to do this with 3, because for one thing, trying to do a run of 3 is a lot longer. It's like 40 minutes, 45, 50 minutes instead of 20 minutes, which is a big deal. And the Holy Water isn't as big a deal there. So anyway, that was Castlevania 1. This is really fun, and Simon's Quest is coming up next. I think everything I said just rhymed. Go me. Simon's Quest.